I want to get comfortable here. I'm on vacation in beautiful Maui, and I thought I'd do a quick video about my pile installations on my shop. Um, so I was pretty excited when I got my drawings back and I looked at the pile details in comparison to my neighbors. My neighbors were around 6 foot of spacing, which gave them a ton of piles. And when I counted that up, I was like, man, like in comparison to my pile count, this is a fraction. So they must have taken that in consideration. And my neighbor, his piles were overdone. But then when I started to look at the torque values, the type of piles used, and also the rebar in my grade beam, I started to realize that this was not apples to apples. So I sent over my pile details to my pile installer. Shout out to Ronnie Daub over at Torsion Screw Piles, who's great. I can't say enough good things about him. And when he was looking at it, he had a couple questions as far as the spacing, as well as my grade beam installer had the same questions because my neighbor, his piles were spaced at around 6 foot apart, but my piles were anywhere from 9 to almost 14 feet apart, which was not standard. But because my engineers used 20 mil rebar in my grade beam and they beefed up my grade beam to 30 inches, um, 24 at my door buck downs, and they had 3 horizontal levels of rebar, which my neighbors only had 2. The cost savings that I was so excited about skyrocketed, and I was at a lot higher of a cost ratio than my neighbor because 20 mil rebar is not a residential size rebar. And like even to cut a 20 mil rebar is insane. It's a 1 inch rebar, and you probably will not see that unless you work on an industrial site like I do. So I had to go back and forth multiple times to that engineering company to clear up the details and change the amount of horizontal runs to my foundation because we had 3, and to tie 3 horizontal runs is a ton more work, and they'd already paid those engineers, so they were hesitant to help me out because their work was done in their minds, right? So, and that's another mistake I made where I had paid them because I had looked over the drawings and I really didn't look at the torque values and compare them to other foundations, and most people wouldn't. You just assume that the engineers know. And like I said in my last video, there are multiple ways that engineering can tackle items. And this was a way that I guess for a guy like me, when I look at 24 piles versus 50 piles, I'm like, oh, I saved on those piles. But when I look at the torque value being 1.5 times, that could mean 2 to 3 more extensions. Uh, and if you don't understand screw piles, that is where the waters get murky, is where um, the deeper you go, the higher the cost because each extension costs more for that pile. So that's the unknown. But because I had a geotechnical survey done, I wasn't super worried because I thought when I looked at the soils report that it was a tacky, wet, uh, plasticky clay base. So that is good for torque values. You would hope that you could achieve torque pretty reasonably in that type of soil. So one of the actions they asked me to do instead of charging me to re-engineer is to mark up a red line with my pile installer and my grade beam installer, which I just marked up extra piles. I didn't like the 14-foot spacing. I didn't want that support in between, especially considering I talked them out of the third level of rebar, and I knocked down that grade beam from 30 inches to 24 inches. Uh, they really wanted that third level of rebar, which was an extra $4,000 touch that just seemed unreasonable to me when I looked at my neighbor's details. that 13-foot span I cut in half. I sent that over to them and they just signed off on it, pretty much is what happened there. I didn't like that because instead of actually revising my drawings, I redlined them and they signed off on them, which seemed pretty amateurish. It seemed like it wasn't a real professional way to do things, but I was at the mercy of them at that point because I wanted to get my project going. So luckily, uh, torsion screw piles came out multiple times to deal with the torque value issues, and Ronnie was able to come up with a different head design that was reasonably priced and was pretty similar to his original quote, and everything worked out that way. But then I had to deal with the grade beam installation and talk to the engineering company about removing that third row of rebar because of the cost difference as well as the complexity of tying all that rebar that my grade beam installer was concerned about. So in the end, it all worked out. I learned a lot about foundations and grade beams in that time, and I'll know better next time. And I'll know that there's a lot more to it than just pile numbers, and torque values come into play and the size. I think Ronnie had to go from a 3.5 inch pile to a 4.5 inch pile on some of my higher levels of piles. So in my index, there's a P1, a P2, a P3, and a P4. P4 was the highest torque value, P1 was the lowest. So 4.5 inch piles on those P4 piles, a lot of lessons learned. But again, I can't stress enough, at the initial point of your project, make sure that you're doing a background check on these engineering companies and the drawing companies.